Koka sunarai sunarayenti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayenti.
Hello, welcome to this new episode of the Mango TV podcast. Today I'm very excited to have Tanya Kazeminy. We're going to start with a quote from Tanya. Tanya says, "I wholeheartedly believe that the fastest way to heal in all dimensions of our life is to work with our sexuality. This is where our most powerful life force resides, and yet it's the least examined." So true. Tanya published GASP Sexual Healing in 2019. She's a teacher, a writer, and a speaker. She teaches her sexual evolution workshop around the world. Tanya works with sexuality for one pure reason: to create more love in the world by making more love. Her deepest purpose is to create love and connection in small ways and big ways. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
So, Mangusta Production started as a production company. We started with 2012 Time for Change, based on this idea that global transformation comes from personal transformation. Then we produced a documentary called Monogamish on ethical non-monogamy. And through that, through the speakers, we were directed through some sex-positive people and organization. And then there was some common area with the Tantra world. And then we've been working on the production of a documentary called Sex to Spirit with all the Tantra teachers. And then sexuality has become a big interest on Mango TV for all the reasons you mentioned on your on your bio. So as usual, we like to have a little bit this, we are interested in transformation, in cathartic moment, in exploring why people might one day completely change their life and decide to dedicate their life to others, maybe through esoteric practice. We cover very closely psychedelic and in general non-ordinary state of consciousness for healing and growth. And of course, sexuality is the queen of non-ordinary states for growth, healing, and pleasure, which also we feel is very important, and desire that for all the reasons that we're going to see, we don't examine, as you say. So why don't you give us a little bit of the biographical information about, where did you grow up, what kind of culture, what was maybe even your personal evolution with sexuality, and we'll start from there, if you don't mind.
I was born in London to an English mother and an Iranian father. And shortly after I was born, we moved to Minnesota in the States. And so I grew up in Minnesota.
Wow, like my wife.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I know. That's what we met over. I was like, oh, a Midwesterner.
Well, Ibiza.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what I was like. We kind of high-fived, like, what a transition to make it out of the sticks and into this beautiful world.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I went to live in Iran. Our family, my dad was moved to Iran when I was 9. And we lived there until I was like 11 and a half. And then the revolution happened, and we moved back to Minnesota. And in your question that you sent me before we started, you just said simply like, where was the point that I lost myself, or when was the point that I found myself, was how I interpreted your question. And I was really thinking that I think that that's when I lost myself, and I think that's when so many of us lose ourselves, is in that really sweet space of moving into being a teenager. And for me, I'd lived in Tehran, and we traveled the world, and my perspective, my view of possibility had become enormous. And then we moved back to Minnesota, and we lived in like basically a small farming town where no one even had a passport, and no one was interested in having a passport. They didn't even leave the state, let alone the country. So that was the point where I had to kind of, in order to fit into that space, I had to make myself really, really small. And I did. I did, and I did such a good job that it wasn't for maybe something more like 30 years that I started to come out of that and realize that I had squished myself up into this tiny little ball, and that wasn't the truth of who I am. I know I've kind of gone in a strange direction. Are you happy with the direction I'm moving in?
Very happy.
Okay, just
and
checking.
I resonate with what you said about that. Maybe we lose our authenticity maybe as teenagers, right?
I think that's the point where we really start to drink the Kool-Aid on like the social conditioning really kicks in. And interestingly, it's like, I mean, not at 11, but in our teenage years when we really start to activate sexually as well. So it's an interesting dichotomy, like an interesting meeting point of two forces. But I witnessed that. I know you have a son, and there's just a point where the innocence of childhood, like the certainty of knowing who you are. When we're kids, you watch little girls, you watch little boys, they know who they are. Like little girls are little sass pants. Like they are strong and they are powerful, and they know their power. And then when you get into the space of teenagedom, it's like this massive shift, the hormonal shift that like I read a book about it, and it's the time in our lives when we are experiencing the most physical, psychological change. And at that point, we kind of lose touch with our truth, and we start to be what society has instructed us to be.
If your parents don't help.
Honestly, I think that the forces of society are so strong. I mean, I'm a great mother. Like, I'm a great mother, and I watch my kids go through this. And I was like, I was there, I was present, I was ready to fight the battle to hold them in the truth of themselves, but I watched them drop. And so I think that I'm sure there are places where this doesn't happen, of course, but I don't meet many people that have known the truth of themselves through their whole life. Do you?
That's a good question. So I want to mention Gabor Mate. Mm-hmm. He says that there is two major there's two major desire in life. There is, or even need, the need for attachment and a need for authenticity. Because, the attachment, because, as a human being, we're not independent the first few years, and we need the authenticity evolutionary to feel the saber-toothed tiger in the savannah and not be eaten. And he says that what happened probably around pre-puberty, where, the parents might be distracted, and the kids, in order to get the attachment back, they lose their authenticity. That's exactly what happened to me. My father was not interested to be a father. He was like dashing around the world, and I pretend to be what he wanted me to be to get his attachment back. So I feel that, in that, when the force of society start to put their pressure, as you said, that's the job of the parents, to create the emotional support, saying to compensate those forces that pressurize in one direction with forces of love and reassurance and positive reinforcement that most people don't have. That's why they succumb to the force of society. But did I meet anybody that navigated that? Everybody's more or less traumatized, especially in Ibiza, especially in this podcast. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if anybody has navigated. I mean, I know people that had really loving, present parents, and it shows in the choice they made in their marriage, in the wife, the husband they choose. So yeah, there is hope for good education.
Oh, of course, there's always hope, but I'm not sure it's not part of the process of humaning.
Yeah.
And when you said that about Dr. Gabor Mate, what I really love when he speaks about is attunement. So you talked about your father, like his absence at that time, at that point in your life, but it was probably always like that, and you were probably being molded into, like, you were probably seeking even harder his approval when you were younger because you were more dependent on his on the attachment.
Approval, yeah.
Yeah, because like that was where safety lies. But yeah, I love the notion. I was just at Harvest in London, and I'm going to call him Gabor because that's how he introduced myself to him. He said he introduced himself to me, and I was like super fangirling. I had lunch with him, and I was just like, "Oh my God!" But he talked about attunement, and I thought that was the most, like, that was so specific to me. This idea that your parents can love you hard and be amazing, but that they don't recognize the truth of who you are, and if they don't, and I think that if they don't acknowledge who you are to yourself, but they acknowledge who you are to them, kind of, am I making sense?
Yeah.
That creates like tremendous stress inside a child, because and so you work as a child to find the meeting point of who you are and who they think you are.
Yeah.
But that notion of attunement was so fascinating to me, that it can be so confusing. Your parents can be so incredibly loving, but they don't actually see who you are. And that's like a really big breaking point. For me, I recognize that very clearly. Like, my parents are incredibly loving, but I don't think they understood my wildness in many ways. Like, my kind of, I'm a super mystical creature. Like, I would have been really like realmy and like traveling in my imagination and my dreams. I would have had contact with other beings and other lives. I would be in that space. And I think it's part of the parents. They feel it's their job to condition you, like, God, we can't send her out into the world like this. Like, we need to help her figure out how to navigate.
So you felt your parents were not so much in attunement, and because of the force of society in Minnesota, you felt like make yourself small.
Yeah, I literally felt like we lived in Minnesota, we moved to Tehran, like life exploded into possibilities, smells, colors, countries, like flavors. Wow. And then we suddenly went back to Minnesota, and it was like trying to put myself back in the clothes from 3 years ago, like literally trying to squish myself into a winter jumper, which doesn't fit me anymore. And I think that process I was very determined to do it. I was like, if I'm going to be here and I'm going to make friends, I have to fit in. And that involves being what everybody else is. And I did it so well. That I completely lost touch with myself until, gosh, in my 40s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But how long were you living in Minnesota for?
Oh, I left Minnesota when I was, I don't know.
More or less.
20-ish, something like that.
And where did you go?
London.
And so that was a different story, though. There was different societal pressure.
Completely. But again, it was this thing about, like, I just had this psychology of fitting in. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm going to fit in here. And it was like my being American was an embarrassment, like it didn't fit with what people valued. So it was just, my story of life has always been, I've been like a really good chameleon, which is a wonderful quality to have, but it also is like, I don't know, I just was really lost to myself.
Yeah, me too. Really, I resonate with chameleon.
Right? And it's like a super good skill. It's an incredible, it's like a superpower. Like, I can, morph myself into different situations. And I'm so good at it that I convince myself.
But so what were you doing professionally in London in your 20s?
Oh, gosh, I've had a lot of careers.
Here and that.
I worked as a buyer at Harrods.
Uh-huh.
I worked in an advertising agency, and then
So nothing sexually related?
No. And then I worked in skincare. So then I built a skincare business with 3 of my best friends. And so, and through the course of the skincare, I started to write again. So I was writing all the copy, writing all the press releases, writing the essence of the brand. And it was kind of there that I started to like find my voice again. It was interesting. Because essentially I think like I'm a writer. I love writing. I love words. I absolutely love words. Like, words are my jam, man. Like, it's my deepest pleasure when a word comes towards me that works, or when I put a sentence together, I read a sentence that just takes me apart.
Nice. You should come to the creative writing of Alexia.
I have.
Nice,
I have.
nice.
It's beautiful.
But so tell me, so how did you get interested in sexuality?
It was a story of, I wonder if you relate to this. Like sometimes I think we get these kind of universal assignments, right? I was divorced from a 20-year marriage. I divorced from a 20-year marriage. Is that the right count? Is that right? Something in that space. And I had this deep recognition, like that was my return home to myself. I mean, it started before the divorce because I had to build up my. It took a long time to get to the point where I walked out the door, and when I did, I really questioned this idea of like, you know, we make these contracts and we say we'll be together forever, and it was like this dissolution of that knowing and recognizing that the only person that I was going to be with forever was myself. And I literally was like, I better get good with me. And so I just devoted my whatever time that I wasn't like on the floor in a ball crying was really turning back towards myself and recognizing the incredible opportunity of transformation in that space. And
in which space?
In the space of
self-inquiry.
In the space of dissolution, like my life had just dissolved, you know, like I have my children, I have my work, I was completely like, you know, my devotion to my kids was first and foremost, but right underneath that was my devotion to myself and the discovery of the truth of me. And to come into a different relationship with myself. Literally, I was like, I have no idea who I am. I don't know. And I would think, like, I wonder how tall I would stand if I stood up straight, you know?
So the catalyst for this self-inquiry was the divorce.
Yeah. It was such a precious gift, like such a precious gift.
I see. And so, okay, I think I'm curious to know how.
You want to get back to the sexuality piece?
I want to get to the
sexuality. Yeah, okay, so somewhere in that time.
No, honestly, I'll tell you the truth. I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit resistant to ask you how was your sexual life in your marriage because I feel it's a bit indiscreet.
Yeah, but that is indiscreet.
Yeah. Okay.
It is indiscreet, and it kind of has nothing to do with anything. I mean, I think that I'm of Persian lineage, you know, like we are powerful sexual beings, like that's part of the line. That's, you look at what's happening in Iran, it's because of the fear of the depth of that power, you know, within the women and within the men, but especially I think within the women. So let me just, I'm gonna carry on with the story. So at that time, in that space of transformation and dissolution and discovery of who I am, I started to get these kind of downloads on things that I was supposed to be doing. And I didn't have the languaging for that then. I didn't understand that what was happening, but looking back, I can see very clearly. And the first download was about making films about water. So I had begun that as that's a side story, and we'll talk about that in maybe another time, but I received this really powerful download about writing a book of erotica.
Autoerotica. No. Writing a book about?
Of erotica.
Erotica, yeah.
And it was one of those things which like takes you over the idea, and you're like, yes, I'll do it this way, I'll do this, and I'll bring in some other authors and we'll create something, and it was like this like obsession for 2 weeks. And then reality came in really hard, and you're a mother of 2 children, like you can't be writing a book about erotica. Your father is Iranian, you come from a very conservative lineage
background. Yeah.
I'm a super private person, like I'm not going to write a book about erotica, like forget about it. And so I stopped. And then this book kept knocking on my door and knocking on my door and knocking on my door until finally in 2018 I was so annoyed by the knocking. I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it.
But can I ask you, this download that you said, you know, universal or cosmic download, they were like coming through any specific practice, through dream work, through meditation? How were you catalyzing them?
They just like land like an obsession, like an idea would come into my head. I'd become obsessed with it for like a couple of weeks. I couldn't, like everything was in relation to that idea. I'm sure you've had, probably this podcast was that for you, like these kind of like it's sort of bigger than me. And I would, like, a lot of them I would park for a period of time, and I would think they would have gone away, but they kept coming back. And now I kind of see, like, I can see so clearly this line. So in 2018 I said, okay, fine, I'll create this book. And so GASP was a book that was created within a year. It was at the printing press in a year once I took the contract, and I wrote down what I was going to do.
So GASP stands for something?
GASP is
GASP. Interesting.
And in the beginning, the book had this whole, I just entered into the realm of dating, and I was back in the world of sex, and I was just watching how disconnected it is. Really watching how disconnected it is. I love the idea that it's so friction based, and I wanted to create a book which was non-friction. And the book was, the beginning purpose of the book was an invitation into connected sex, because it was like some kind of a healing solution for the addiction to porn, the disconnection, the way that people are moving through the world, the hookups on the Tinder hookups, all of those things I think are really damaging to our soul. It's because it's back to, we were talking about regenerative farming, it's monocropping, we're approaching sex from one dimension, and sex is such a multi but so biodiverse. So when I was just watching the pain that I think it causes in people when they don't allow connection, when they're terrified of connection. We're supposed to connect, this is where love lives. And when we stay in that space of very pornish behavior, as an every meal, finally, pornish behavior, to have disconnected sex, pornish, that's fine on a, on a Tuesday night. But if you're having that every single night for your meal, it's not nutritionally sound. It's not healthy for us as humans, and for love, it's not healthy for love. So the beginning of GASP was about that, and GASP has been written by 20 different writers. There's 30 different artists which have contributed. The book is primarily anonymous, which was one of the conditions my kids said to me. They're like, okay, fine, Mom, you want to do this. We get it. We support you. But can you make it anonymous, or it's total social suicide for us at school? And I was like, gotcha, no problem. So it was an anonymous series of stories. And within the book are teachings as well.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you to elaborate a little bit on, disconnected sex. You mentioned porn. You mentioned the dating, Tinder. What is why? Can you elaborate? What does it mean, disconnected sex?
I think I feel that people are afraid to bring themselves into the room. They're afraid to show the truth of who they are. And so they're presenting constantly. They're presenting this form that they think will be acceptable. Back to the acceptance and the...
As a teenager in...
Exactly. It's the same thing. Were I to show that myself, my innocence, my vulnerability, my hungers, my kink, my whatever... were I to show my heart, and that was rejected. It's too much to bear, and therefore I will present this pumped up version of myself. And further, I don't have a lot of education on what, that's a long conversation, because I think we've been held out of, sex is so powerful. Our sexuality is so powerful. When we really connect to this force that lives inside of us, we don't need religion. I can connect to God directly. I don't need a religion to tell me what God is saying. I can hear what God is saying through my body, through the intersection of our bodies, in my self-practice, in a practice with another human. I can feel that. And so the powers that be, the management, as it were, has been very rigorous in holding us out of that space of the possibility of our own internal miraculous combustion sexuality power.
Yeah.
So
The church has weaponized the concept of desire to control us, for sure.
And for sure. I mean, religion is one dimension, but it goes in a lot of other dimensions as well. But I think primarily it probably comes from church first.
Yeah. Margot Anand says that all religion, all belief, all school of thought, all philosophy, they don't go below the waist. They say they don't even look. They say it's too dangerous, except Tantra. And I remember this Tantra practitioner was telling me that he was mentioning a clinical trial research that I never find, to be honest, that a peak orgasm, which means, like clitoridian for her and peak, like fast for him, caused the drop in 3 neurotransmitters: dopamine, oxytocin, and lactose. So the oxytocin goes down, so you feel disconnected with the partner. It's the opposite of MDMA, where oxytocin goes up. Dopamine goes down, so you don't feel good about yourself. And so with this drop, that doesn't foster deeper connection. He says he was designed more for the man to spread the semen for evolutionary purpose, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, a full body orgasm increase dopamine and oxytocin. So you feel more connected with the other person, you feel better by yourself. And this teacher was saying, if you want to have a long-term committed monogamous relationship, you better learn to have full body orgasm, because otherwise it's going to be hard. And we're working on it. So maybe that's what disconnected sense is the most friction, localized.
But when you said it causes a drop in dopamine and oxytocin and you don't feel good about yourself, to me, I just heard shame.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this whole, the marriage of like the deepest marriage we hold is the marriage of sexuality and shame.
Yeah.
And
so true.
And I also, so fast forward through the process of the book, and the teachings were all my writings. And when the book came out, it was very practical. Like I was like, I see where the book is going to go. I see, like, the book is beautiful. I don't know if I should have brought you one. The book is incredible. The book, like, it hums with love. Like, it hums with love. It's a beautiful book, but it has so much integrity. And the book came out, at a certain point, I talked to my parents about this, and my dad literally said, like, you're ruining our family name. And so, I mean, which I understand. I understand why he would say that. I understand. But for me, the thing was, the book needed to be successful because I had gone so far out on the vulnerability limb in creating this. Like, I couldn't even believe. Even now, I can't believe I was brave enough to do it. So that's what I mean about this universal mission. Like, it was...
There was a lot of autobiographical material?
Yeah. I mean, of course, you're writing erotica. It's like, whether it happened or it didn't happen, it's from, like, your most vulnerable, precious places. But the book came out, and, like, it was like nothing happened. Like, nothing happened. Like, it was just like tumbleweed rolling across the website. And I was like, Jesus Christ, like, I've done all this. Like, what do I do? Like, I'm a businesswoman. I'm really good at marketing. I'm really good at building brands. I was like, okay, fine, kick into that space. And part of what I realized was, like, the way that the book would become known is if I started to talk. And so I began to teach.
Oh, wow.
And I began to teach the things that I'd written in the book. And
without a formal training.
I mean, I've been a teacher for years. I have many, many, many different trainings. You know, I'm a meditation teacher. I'm a yoga teacher. I studied psychology at university. I have been, you know, within my business, I was the trainer. I did all the teaching. So,
wow.
Teaching has been
second nature,
right? It's just like these things. Like I didn't really recognize that was happening, but there was this current through my life. When we look back at our lives, we can see, oh yeah, that was always the way. Oh yeah, I was always writing. Words were always my jam. Like, oh, I see. And then this, you know, I used to train for my business, our skincare business. I trained 200 people at a time. Like I had to be engaging. I had to learn how to teach people about our products in a way that enthused them to sell them. So these like different practices, these funny things, and they kind of come together into a certain space. So I began teaching, and the more I teach, the more I recognize the importance of the teaching. I become so much more committed to this work because I see how much brokenness there is in the world. And it's such important work. And it took me a long time to give myself permission to take this seat. Well, I said I taught, you know, like primarily I was doing readings and stuff. It was like, it wasn't front-facing, I teach about sexuality. That took me a really long time before I came to trust my safety enough. Like I recognize that maybe the most important thing in this space is my capacity to be loving and my capacity to be safe. And I really know that about myself. So I can step into a space and I know that whoever's in front of me is safe with me. And I think that's crucial because there is so much unsafety in the space of sexuality, in our lives, in our history, in our lineage, in the world, you know, like it's a beautiful landscape to open out the teaching of sexuality, but it's also a space where there's going to be a lot of kind of murky, shady characters, ground area that people are working within. You probably have some stories.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, in like the psychedelic scene, I mean, when there is power, there is abuse, right? But do you mind me asking how did you go about starting the teaching career? It just started just on the website, or you started doing workshop? And who were your teachers in a way, your inspiration, your cultural reference? Which angle did you approach this sexual teaching? Can you tell me a little bit about the teaching?
I studied a lot. Like I think my core teacher, overall teacher, would be a man called Adyashanti. Who, I don't know if you're familiar with him, Zen Buddhist.
Yeah.
I think he's actually been the human on this planet who has led me to like the deepest realizations of myself. So I have like a long background in Buddhism, which I wouldn't ever presume to say I'm an expert at because it's an enormous philosophy, but it's really instructed my worldview and my internal view. Like I orient a lot within that space. I've had some really amazing teachers. Like I did 500-hour yoga teacher training with a woman called Sarah Powers, and where she teaches from is the intersection of yoga, psychology, and Buddhism.
Oh, wow.
So...
But what does Buddhism and Zen and Adyashanti has to say about sexuality? If you can summarize, I know it's difficult.
I think that at the heart of all of this is self-love. At the heart of all of this is self-love. And if I were to give up teaching sexuality, if I were to define myself in any other way, I would say I teach self-love. And honestly, I'm always teaching self-love. I'm always teaching about love. That's all I'm ever teaching about. And I like to work within the space of sexuality because it lies at the center of us. And if I can add like a little bit of an erotic charge to the teaching, it expands its power. It's like a force that allows the messages to go deeper inside of you cellularly. Does this make sense?
Completely. It's very well said. And I just realized now to what importance is this concept of boundaries. And, I did the ISTA level 1, and there's a lot about boundary and desire. And this is ultimately are critical to contain and allow you to express self-love. Because we are so used to neglect our boundaries to fit society, as we've been saying all along. So, okay.
I teach about boundaries. It's one of my favorites. So I teach a series of classes underneath the banner of sexual evolution. So I have one of my kind of gatherings, bundles of teachings is sexual evolution. And within that, there's 4 different courses. And freedom of boundaries is one of the courses and the classes. And
the freedom
of boundaries.
The freedom that boundaries allow to you to obtain.
I just love boundaries. I love boundaries because boundaries are the way that I prove to myself that I am trustworthy to myself. Like for me, that boundaries is about increasing my trustworthiness to me.
Totally.
How do I show myself that I'm trustworthy so that my inner children can appear to me and lay their head on my lap and say, this is where I'm hurting. I demonstrate to them that I am safe by holding boundaries, by not continually throwing myself under the bus.
Yeah.
Like, oh, here comes the bus again. Let me just throw myself under that. And with boundaries, I develop a way of communicating to the different dimensions of myself. To me, I'm a village. Like I'm who you see now, and within me, I'm like a multiplicity of little children, like orphan dimensions of myself that I want to bring on the journey of self-love. I cannot climb the mountain of love when I'm leaving pieces of myself at the bottom. So I need to attend to all of these pieces so that we can climb the mountain of love together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very well said. And I just realized that ultimately trauma dissolves the ability to create boundary in addiction, in just in behavior. It's very interesting. But so another term that caught my attention in your work is this idea of sexual evolution, because it's true that most people evolve in every domain. At work, with sport, with interest, with culture. But then sexually, they think that that's one thing you do this way and you make love at 40, 50, 60 like you were doing at 20.
Or 15. Like whenever you first... I find that was my discovery, was I was like, why are all these like really amazing men, as soon as you get in the bedroom, they're behaving like they're 15? Like it's like at the point where they got initiated into sex, it's like there's a kind of a freeze.
But can you elaborate? What is a 15 behavior?
Oh, what is a 15 behavior? Gosh, you could tell me probably better than I could tell you, but like
for me, it's like insecurity and premature ejaculation. So that sounds very good for this man you're describing.
I don't know. It's like for me the whole
inauthenticity.
It's not. It doesn't have any depth to it. It's like one-dimensional, and I get it because there is no teaching out there. Like there is just like, I remember I held a class for when we go back to the water story, I held exhibitions of my water films, and within the exhibitions I would invite teachers, and one of the things was I did a tantra class for teenagers.
Such a good idea.
It was so cool, and I introduced
here
the
in
class.
Ibiza.
It was in London. I would really, I'd love to work with teenagers.
We have
I'd
to
love
do
to
it.
work with children.
We have to do it. We have
yeah,
to do
yeah.
it.
I mean, it's such a perilous ground because of.
Maybe like they call it pre-teen, right? Maybe 18, 21.
Yeah, I think like the time is like would be beautiful, be around 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
And it's
Then there is the consent, the major, the parents. But anyhow, I think in Ibiza it can happen.
I mean, I just think it's a really interesting time to. How I presented it to them was, you don't have like a lot of architectural structures, like, like you've learned onto which you can hang your sexuality, because you've learned about it from shitty movies, like not like whatever, like for me I'm going to say American Pie, like crappy American films where they talk about sex. Then you've seen your parents, and then you've probably seen porn, and that's really like all you got
as a sexual education,
right? And then and so this is just another version, like another architectural structure that you can decide how you want to build your own home with. Like maybe you want to add in these kind of floor to ceiling windows, like, and it was just to share that there's different ways. And I remember this scene, like, because there was the whole thing about the introduction of the truth of the clitoris. And there was like a drawing, like she presented this drawing of the truth of the clitoris, and everybody just leaning forward over this drawing, like, what?
Because it's very long.
It's beautiful. It's like this orchid that lives inside, and like the fact that the clitoris is like when the baby decides whether it's going to be a male or a female, whatever erectile tissue would have become the penis becomes the clitoris. Isn't that cool?
Amazing.
So.
There was a gigantic clitoris at Burning Man this year. Did you see the photo?
I didn't. But that structure. But do you know they only discovered this like
recently, like 40 years ago or something?
No, less than that.
Oh, wow.
It was like in the 2000s or the late 1900, like 1992, 1998, 2002.
Wow.
Somebody in France finally mapped the clitoris, and it was like, what? Crazy, right? I mean, we could talk about the clitoris for ages, just the way that it's been, like, it was removed from Grey's Anatomy. Like, it's just, because it's the truth of our pleasure, like, it has no other purpose than pleasure. No other purpose. So it directly says, if God didn't make women for pleasure, why would he have made this? It's like,
totally.
It's just the instantaneous, like, of course I'm here for pleasure. Of course we're here for pleasure. There's no other purpose for this organ than pleasure.
Amazing. Okay, so you started with your Buddhist and Zen practice that directed you towards self-love, and then you created like a first class or workshop or endowed. When was that, más o menos? Like, how many years ago?
2019.
2019. So pre-COVID.
2019.
And then probably during lockdown, you had a lot of Zoom.
Yeah.
On sex education.
I haven't taught. Like, my teaching career has been. I didn't like ramp it up and do this like, all right, I'm on. It wasn't like that. I've never been very good at pushing myself forward for things. Like, it's never been easy for me to say like, oh, I don't know. So the thing, I've always operated in the way of what comes to me, I give my all. So lockdown was beautiful. Lockdown was in my home in London with my kids, and like,
nurturing time.
Yeah, just simple and sweet. I'm super, super fortunate to have that story to tell. But then it started to grow, and it started to build, and at a certain point I really accepted the assignment. I think for almost, like I said, I went into this book and this space with a lot of resistance. And at a certain point I just, really what I started to hear was all the abuse stories. I just started to hear all the abuse stories, and I thought, I just realized like 60% of the world has been abused.
Really?
That's my guess. It's my guess as I hear it. Men, women, I hear stories. It's so common, and there's so much shame around it, and nobody talks about it. And that depth of hurt, I just really recognize, like, if we want our children to be safe in this world, we need to heal our sexuality.
Totally.
And it's like I have so much compassion for where that act would have come from and how that act was received. And I really, whatever I can do, I'm going to do.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. This lady, Amanda Fielding, she started a very successful foundation to legalize psychedelic. And she says that a little in a provocational way, but not so much, that the origin of all evil in the world is sexual frustration. And
Frustration. Okay.
And I was reading, I can't remember if it was a book or a film about how Al Qaeda turned some young Muslim in London to become a Judaist. And the common denominator among all this story in this series or book, I don't remember, was the sexual frustration.
Frustration's an interesting word. I would use distortion.
Distortion or lack of, rather. Sexual frustration for meaning like,
being held out of that space.
Involuntarily celibacy. Like there's a big movement, the incel.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, it's an exaggeration, but it's true.
No, I don't think it's an exaggeration. I think that's one dimension of how it's in some ways it's proof that is the way that that we are being manipulated in this way. Like, and if you turn up the volume on that manipulation, you can create this. And if you keep it quiet, you create this. Like, I mean, but yeah, I just really feel that, like, back to this thing about watching Iran, I watched Iran over this past year, what's happening in Iran, and all of that is about sexuality. All of that is about sexuality. Like 20,000 people jailed. They're still murdering people quietly, one by one, executing people. There's still so much violence towards women there. There's still so much raw pain that's happening there, and all of it is a fear of sexuality. All of it. Women can't show their hair. What do you mean you can't show your? If I show my hair, it's going to be so like you're going to jump across this table and ravage me because you're so out of control at the sight of my hair. And if you jump across the table and ravage me, that will not be your fault. That will be my fault, because I will have caused that by showing you my hair. I will have enticed you. It's a very strange story, isn't it?
So the origin of the Prophet, of the Quran, of Muhammad, I mean, that's very similar to the Christian background of controlling desire to control humanity. What was
I mean, I think it depends on if you're talking about the actual words of any of these prophets or the way that they were interpreted after their life. And I'm not an expert. Like, I'm way out of my depth now, so I should probably be quiet before I...
Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay, but so I'm curious to see how your... Okay, sorry, I think I interrupted earlier on. You were saying that, your teaching is called Sexual Evolution, and there is 4 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
So one is about boundary, freedom of boundary.
The first one is authenticity.
Authenticity.
I'm teaching tomorrow. Maybe you'll come.
Nice.
The first one is authenticity. The second is boundaries. The third is self-love, and the fourth is a workshop for women, which I'd really like to work with men as well in the. Well, anyway, it's really about the experience of being a woman and how much we have been contained. So it's like I teach in a very kind of university class way. Like I'm very structured in my teaching, and I really know what I want to, the points that I want to deliver, like the thoughts I want to land. So so that the fourth one is called the worship workshop, and that's about the recognition of our how society has created this hatred within ourselves for our vulva, for our yoni, for our womb space, like for our sexual dimension.
because woman comes with this huge trauma of the patriarchy, of being ownership of a father and then become ownership of a husband. I mean, this has been thousands of year conditioning, and this is reflecting in the trauma and the lack of freedom and lack of empowerment of some of these ladies that you teach, right?
I think that patriarchy sucks for everyone.
Yeah,
every sentient being. Like I'm a huge advocate for men. Huge. I've raised 2 men. Like the patriarchy, the abuse, which is like the brutality with which men are treated is enormous. So I don't like
differentiate.
We both have suffered massively. Men and women have suffered massively under this ridiculous force, under this paradigm that we are trying to move through. And yeah, so I don't want to say that, like, I just always want to say in the same breath that men have suffered just as much, because we have to move towards union. We have to move towards union. We have to have compassion for men and for women. Like, if we're not, we're watching what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's just division, hatred, blame. And at a certain point, we need to forgive. We need to forgive each other for the way that we have behaved, and recognize the pain that lies underneath that behavior, and really realize that until we're working in unison and we're peaceful together, we're not going to get anywhere. So
yeah. But so forgive me, Tanya, if sometimes I like to put a little bit my marketing head on, because you've been so modest and humble about not really selling your services. But I'd love people in this podcast to take away some like concrete, applicable, practical insight. So if a woman is listening to us and she feel that she need to work on this energy, that she feels that there's a lot of potential, she understands the potential, but there's some blockage of whatever kind, maybe can you describe a typical situation of before, during, and after of a client that comes to you? Let's say it's a lady that I just described that wants to harness his energy in a more empowered way. How would the process be, if you could summarize it?
The process with me?
Yes.
There's different ways that you can work with me. I do a lot of one-on-one work, and my one-on-one work is I'm very intuitive. So you can come to me with the mess of your thoughts. I work with men and with women, and we would drop into our hearts, and through a conversation through our hearts, we kind of we find a path for you to follow, and I would offer you practices. And you want me to be more specific in an actual journey, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, so those are the ways that you can either work with me on a one-on-one situation. You can attend my classes in the real. I'm also creating my classes online. And the way that we would work together is we would quest within you to find the places where you are resistant to love. It's pretty much that. We're just looking for the places inside of you where you have built barriers to love, barriers to self-love. And I'm very pragmatic, the way that when you come to one of my classes, you'll leave with notes and exercises, and they're beautiful. They're tiny little invitations, which are a pleasure to add into your day and your life. For women, for somebody listening who doesn't have access to any of these things, I think it's really the simplicity of putting your hand on your womb. Just tuning into your womb, like really like placing your hand on your lower belly as many times as you can a day, and rubbing and letting yourself for a moment, for a second, for a minute, just attune to your womb space. And then allowing through that attunement, that tiny thing that you're doing that seems ridiculous, in a period of time, over whether it be days, weeks, or months, you will start to have epiphanies appearing within your own life. You'll reconnect yourself to your voice. You know, you want to reconnect yourself to your instincts, and this is where our instincts lie. And it would probably be quite similar for men. You know, like you don't have a womb, but you have your hara, your dantian, your power source in the same area. It's 3 fingers down from your belly button, and it exists in the center of your body. So 3 fingers down in the center, which is actually very like where your womb space is for women, is where we are connected to Earth. We're connected to knowing that we couldn't possibly know. So just that simple act of rubbing your lower belly and having a moment where you just are with that rubbing, and then very quickly it just becomes like something you do to soothe. You come back to that as a soothing space, and you will be amazed at how much information within yourself you will unlock. How does that feel?
That's definitely applicable.
Right? And
advice.
it seems if it were you to follow this path for today, tomorrow, the week, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at the memories which will come forward to you and the knowing which will come forward to you. And were you to follow this path for several months, you would be much more attuned to your intuition.
Interesting. And so what do you think about the current state of the Tantra, the Neo-Tantra, the sexual liberation course? Do you feel, do you have any comment or...
I think that it's really, I think it's beautiful work. I believe very deeply that if we push past our trauma to be free, we can push past our trauma to be in those spaces of sexual freedom. And then I think we're just re-traumatizing ourselves. I feel it's very important to create a space of safety within yourself before you move into those collective sexual experiences. Or, you know, I think there's a lot of pressure to present as a free creature, which is still, it's not authentic. You're pushing past the places inside of you which are crying to be seen. And you're like, no, I'm not going to see you again. Again, I'm going to push past you. Again, I'm going to push past you. And I think that can be really traumatic.
Yeah.
I think that can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
And so I feel that wherever you go to learn about these dimensions of yourself, I hope that they involve a basis of self-love before you move there. Like, I would look for that and I would listen to myself. Like, if I walk into a room and I shut down, I feel nervous, my throat chakra, my heart closes up, I feel cramping in my womb space, my yoni feels like she's screaming and wants to get out, then I am not going to override that anymore, as I have so many times in the past.
Yeah.
Many times in the past in my life, I have ignored that strong instinct in my body. And so... And I have been in these situations where I've been at these parties or been at these gatherings or been at these things, and I've turned around and walked out the door. Yeah. And I've questioned in those moments when I turned around and walked out the door, is this my, I'm going to do quote marks, frigidity or brokenness, or like, is this me being so uptight? And I turn around and walk out the door, and then I question that part of myself. And now I recognize, like, no, it's not about that. It's that I have not made myself safe in those places yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Does that make
totally,
sense?
yeah, completely. I think this is very important, and I think you express it very well. And I feel it's a little bit the same, a similar risk with psychedelic ceremonies, that they're not handled properly. There's not enough preparation, not enough intention, not enough integration, just not enough care, and that can, traumatize people. And in some of these, Tantra, Neo-Tantra workshop, retreat, 1 week long retreat, it's true. I find myself sometimes in some specific exercise where I didn't feel safe. Emotionally, psychologically. I felt and you don't feel like leaving, because sometimes they pair you with someone else, and then you don't want to leave this person hanging. But here at the, I'm not gonna say where, but one of these Tantra festival, I was extremely uncomfortable in one of these 4-element massage, where the person I was paired with was just not acknowledging the fact that I was a beginner, that I didn't have an experience. She was almost more concerned about her bad luck to end up with a non-expert than really caring for guiding me in this very vulnerable situation. And then I didn't thought much about it, but it's true. It came to mind immediately now that you mentioned, the boundary and, the risk of the re-traumatizing. So yes, like for psychedelic retreat, Tantra retreat should have some sort of ethical screening. Make sure that they have like a code of ethics, series of articles, of understanding where the other person is at, and everybody's in different phase, and make sure that they do a proper screening. I have to say, ISTA level 1 has been amazing. The teacher was incredible, super. I think the three major characteristic of a good teacher, it's, for me, the cognitive, the intellectual ability to explain things. For me, this is still important. And then the embodiment of the teaching, and then the integrity. And I want to do a shout out to Raffaello Manacorda, because he really had these 3 characteristics, and he's part of the faculty, and now restructuring this institute of, it's called International School of Temple Art, who had some, I don't know why I'm going down this road, but anyhow, I want to say that this is an organization that is going through a transformation. They used to allow intercourse between teachers and between facilitator and student with a lot of control, but still that has been abolished, which I think is a good idea. But they take the screening very seriously. I apply for level 2, and in my answers, they address the fact that, did I really integrate level 1? And they made me think. And in a way, I think they were right. So I felt that it's good that they really spend the time to look at those because we don't want now to throw away the baby with the bathwater, right?
No, I agree.
And so
I think it's beautiful that they're doing that. I didn't realize that, and I chapeau. That's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
And important, because, I think that the main thing is that when you walk into a situation or you talk to a teacher, again, place your hand on your womb and tune in. How do I feel in the presence of this person? Are there any red flags? Because I don't want to work with any teacher that I don't respect, that I don't they don't inspire me, and that I don't feel safe with. And safety is probably number 1, because if we're in the wrong, if we're in fight or flight, if our nervous system isn't settled, if we're not in a calm and peaceful place, we can't get into any kind of flow state, and we can't achieve any kind of sexual expansion.
And growth, yeah.
But that, specifically within sexuality, you need to feel safe. If you don't feel safe, your nervous system is not going to relax enough for you to go to the places that are interesting.
Yes. Let me ask you one thing about, being sexually active or not when you're single. So what do you think? I have so many friends, mostly women, to be honest, that, they're looking for the right boyfriend, the right partner. And so they really made a vow of celibacy while they find the right one. What do you think? What would you recommend? And maybe it's, again, one case-by-case situation, but would you recommend self-love, 1? 2, would you recommend to find a partner that might not necessarily be like romantic partner, but a partner that, you choose to explore your sexuality. ISTA has this protocol, BDSMR, something like that. So B is the boundary. You exchange, when you decide to engage with someone, you go through these 5 letters. And so the boundary, you decide, okay, what is your boundary? Do you want to do this, not this, touch here, there? Desire, what you desire. Relationship status, very clear. Are you open? Are you monogamous? Are you in full consent? Whatever your status is. Your sexuality health. When was the last time you had a check? And then meaning, M's for meaning, what kind of aftercare do you need after this engagement? And so people says, oh my God, this is so lame. It kills all the magic. But actually, it creates a safe container for the things you were mentioning, from relaxing your nervous system. So for single people, would you, one, recommend self-love? And maybe, if you don't mind, give some advice. And 2, would you recommend to find a friend, or maybe not a friend, maybe someone new, following a very clear ethical code of sexual engagement and expectation and desire and boundaries, etc.?
As you said, I think everybody's in an individual process. Like in my own life experiment, I did take a year of celibacy, and it was absolutely profound.
But forgive me my ignorance, but celibacy includes self-love?
No. For me, it was just none. For the most part, it was no lovers.
No lovers.
And then like a bit of messing around, but like no lovers, no like penetrate, not be like, I don't know. Anyway, whatever. That's very detailed.
We love details in this podcast.
I know. I'm not really one big one for details.
Yeah, I know.
In the vast expanse, within the context of safe container in my classroom, I'm happy with details. But when it's just going out into the World Wide Web, I'm a bit more reserved in what I'll express. However, I'm a huge advocate for self-pleasure practices, whether you're
men and women,
yeah. for sure, because it's just such an interesting place to. It's such an amazing way for you to push past your boundaries safely. To explore the outer edges safely, and there's no confusion about any external energy. It's just you. So if you hit a point where you're blocked, that's nothing to do with anybody but you. So you can see very clearly where your own constrictions lie, like where you bump up against your own blockages, and I think that, and then you can play in those areas, like, oh, okay, whoa. So you can start to play in those areas, and you can do a lot about expanding your capacity to stay in orgasm for longer periods of time. Like there's just a lot of safety when you're in self-practice, and further, when you've had an extensive self-pleasure practice, you become much better at communicating what it is that you like and you don't like. And then I think it's up to everyone. I watch sometimes, and you can lock yourself up in an ivory tower and wait for him to arrive. And that might be more fear-based than love-based, if you see what I mean. You can be, I think that there's an honesty around saying, I'm doing this because I'm afraid it'll get messy, or I'm doing this because I'm not interested in exchanging energy at that level with random humans, and I respect that as a decision. But if you're kind of spiritually bypassing the truth of the fact that you're just frightened to be vulnerable with somebody, to be in that vulnerability of sexuality, then I think that's another blockage, right?
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about the honesty up front, the learning to communicate. Like those are beautiful practices. The boundaries, your sexual health, the way that you express. I don't think that makes it. I think that the moment of the conversation, talking about your sexual health, is obviously not very sexy, but it is an important conversation to have. But I believe that all of those things are like back to this idea of connection, because one of the things which killed me when I was watching in the beginning was I might, it was very frequent that people would say to me, oh, I had sex with this guy, and then now I don't feel comfortable to text him the next morning. I was like, dude, that guy was like inside of you, like he came inside of you, and that ultimate act of intimacy, and you don't feel comfortable to text him tomorrow morning. You're trying to be cool. Like, what is that? And that's where I'm talking about this disconnect. Like, that I would, as a man or as a woman, that I would allow that degree of intimacy with another human and then ghost them the next day because I'm too frightened to actually engage in the conversation. So I love the creation of a communication. I think to establish a way of talking is a pathway, to establish a pathway of communication, of honesty, of clarity. I love the what do you need for aftercare. I love that. I think it's so important. What do you need for after? What do I need for aftercare? I need to be acknowledged. I'd like to have I'd like to check in a week. Like, let's talk for the next 3 days. I want like a slow drop off. Exactly. And then I'm happy to have space, but let's check in with each other like in the next week and see how we're both feeling. How are you? How do you feel? Do you feel heard? Do you feel seen? Do you feel like, is there anything that, are you judging yourself about anything? Is there anywhere that you're feeling shame that I can help you with? Like, how can I be in service to your growth? And how can you be in service to mine? And how can that be? That can be an exchange which doesn't involve commitment. It can just be an exchange of love for another human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, my feeling is that when I see some of my girlfriends that they're waiting, and okay, this might be the pathological. In some other case, there can be like a psychological obstacle. But let's say that they've done their work on themselves and they're really ready and they're not scared of vulnerability with another person, but they just don't find anybody they like. Would you recommend to engage sexually with someone that they know is not a candidate for a relationship, but just for the sake of loving another human in that moment and working on your sexual evolution?
Personally, I think that it's, as long as the boundaries are clear from the beginning, like, look, I'm looking for a lover. I'm not, like, I'm in the space of seeking something larger, but that's not arrived. And I want touch. I want, I want cuddles. And I think that's like absolutely straightforward and fair.
Yes.
But it's a very
personal,
particular practice. Yeah. Because to stay out of the space of attachment, because that's the issue is like the Disneyfication of life. Like Disney has a lot to answer for in how we perceive, love and relationship, happily ever after. And as a woman, I watch myself, and I can be in that lover space, and I can start to paint all over that person, like, oh my God, maybe he's the one, maybe. And I can like run down that Disney path and, like find ourselves in the whatever, in the little carriage riding off into the sunset. So, but that's, for me, that's been a really interesting practice anyway, because I don't want to be like that if I'm in big love. I don't want to I don't want to fall into that old way of being. So this practicing non-attachment is a really interesting exercise, I have found.
Yes. Also practice.
Am I answering your question?
Yeah, totally. And, I also wanted to see if maybe you find a neurological or neurobiological connection with being sexually active and attracting the person you want to have a relationship with.
I believe that is true.
Exactly.
I believe that is true. I don't have any
proof.
I don't have any proof, and I don't know whether where that's coming from within me. I was literally thinking about that this morning and yesterday. I was like, where's this coming from within me? But I really genuinely feel that, like, when you're in that space of like you're all juiced up, you're like in your personal.
You're more connected to life.
Yeah.
It's very sad because all my friends from childhood from Italy. They basically, most of them just stopped having sex with their wives, and it's like, come on, guys, and I would ask them, so how do you deal with monogamy? And they would say, oh, like everybody else, with food.
Oh, and football.
and football, and then. But so, what do you recommend to a couple that's been together 40 years, and they lost, like to sustain desire for so long is unusual, right? How many couples do you know that have been together 20, 30, 40, 50 years that are sexually active? Do you know any statistics?
I think it's frighteningly. I think the statistics would be really frightening.
Yeah.
I remember so clearly. I remember at Burning Man one year, and I'd never been, like after they burn the man, and I didn't realize that whole night the ashes are like a thing, and people go to the ashes, and I remember walking by, and there was this like much older couple, like they looked like they were well in their 70s, and they were making love in the ashes.
Oh, nice.
And I was just like, oh my God, that is so freaking beautiful. But this is back to this thing of attending to our sexual evolution. So your friends initially, who are they they're gonna talk to their friend, and she's gonna go, oh, I never do it anyway either. No. And like if we talk to our cohort, we're probably gonna have that behavior reinforced. And so where do you learn? Where do you go? And so this is this thing. For me, like when I talk about sexual evolution, I mean, many of the people that we know on the island, most people that are here because we're attending to our evolution. We're interested in evolving, but our sexuality is the area which is probably because it holds the most trauma and the most shame, the most pain, the most like constriction, like the most social conditioning, as I said. It's not an area that it's easy to go to. It's like I watch people, like even with the book. I remember going to some like yoga gathering to sell the book, and I could watch. Some people would pick it up. Some people would literally walk away from the book with their hands in the air, like backing up, because the energy of this untouchable force, like it holds so much pain that they can't even be in the energy of this book. And it broke my heart.
Shouldn't have that broke your heart. You shouldn't say, you should have felt good about yourself that the book is needed.
Oh, I just, like, wow, how do I reach that heart? Yeah. How do I reach that heart that puts their hands up and walks away? Yeah. And that heart needs it so desperately.
Yeah. So let's do a little bit of promotion.
Okay.
For you, for your book, for your course.
Thank you very much.
So where people can find, where they can buy the book, where they can sign up for one-on-one, for the workshop, tell us everything.
So the way that you connect with me is I'm reasonably active on Instagram. That's where I do most of my talking. So my Instagram is @TKandLove. I have a brand new website. Dun, 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 dun. And that is TK and Love as well, so www.tkandlove.com. GASP has its own website.
Amazon?
No, again. No, you have to find it. It's a quest to buy this book.
Interesting.
I didn't make any of this stuff easy. So GASP is gasp.life, but you can find it through my Instagram. GASP has its own Instagram @GASP, which is really beautiful.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Oh.
It was a pleasure to have you, and we'll check in together maybe again in few months.
That would be beautiful.
Thank you very much.
So nice.
Thank you. Peace.
Koka sunarai sunarayenti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayenti.